the lasting lesson from that is that we've got to learn how to treat each other with dignity, and that we don't have to have a lot ourselves in order to do that. Right? It really has to simply come from within. And then the flip side of that, which I hope to be able to get into during our conversation, is that there's also dignity in accepting help, right? That, too often in life, we feel too proud to accept help when it's offered. And my perspective on that is, hey, we have a destiny to fulfill. And if this help is going to be a pathway toward my realizing that destiny, right, to be able to fulfill my life's purpose, if that help is going to be instrumental to my realizing that, then I'm going to accept that help, and I'm going to accept it proudly. Because I'm certainly not going to let something like pride get in the way of realizing what I'm meant to achieve and meant to contribute in this world.
Behind every mission, every movement, and every attempt to create change, there's a human story shaping how it all unfolds. This podcast is for those change makers who believe the work that they're doing in the world should actually make people's lives better. Each week, I'm sitting down with these change makers who are shaping impact in their industries and communities. And together, we're going to explore the moments, the questions, and the perspective shifts that changed how they lead, how they build relationships, and how they create meaningful change in our world. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives. Miguel, welcome to Reframing Perspectives. I cannot wait to dive into everything that you have built your life around, the mission that you've built your life around, the commitment and the work that you're doing. It is, I think, so compelling to see your story and also to see how you have this constant sense of positivity, even with all the challenges that get thrown your way. I'm just going to say that, this is true and true, a New Yorker at heart. And that's how, you just show up with full resilience. But welcome to Reframing Perspectives.
Dr. Beri, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. It's just, just in the few conversations that we've had, I've learned so much. And really, we could probably go on for hours. But I want to start with the beginning. One of the things is you grew up in the Bronx in public housing. You grew up with Puerto Rican born parents who, worked really hard to give you everything, but you're still living in a particular space. You only have a certain level of exposure to the world. Obviously, as kids, what you see around you is your entire world at that time. But when you think back to that apartment, when you think back to the block that you grew up on in the Bronx, and you think back to your childhood, what lessons, do you see yourself thinking about how that has the lessons that your parents taught you, the things that you learned from childhood that you would say that still carry forward today?
Yeah. You don't need dollars to have dignity, right? We grew up extremely modestly. I can still remember, many evenings during the winter when we wouldn't have heat or we wouldn't have hot water. But my sister and I always had a loving home. And so my parents may not have had much to offer materially, but they offered so much in terms of love and support and encouragement. The lasting lesson from that is that we've got to learn how to treat each other with dignity, and that we don't have to have a lot ourselves in order to do that. Right? It really has to simply come from within. And then the flip side of that, which I hope to be able to get into during our conversation, is that there's also dignity in accepting help, right? That, too often in life, we feel too proud to accept help when it's offered. And my perspective on that is, hey, we have a destiny to fulfill. And if this help is going to be a pathway toward my realizing that destiny, right, to be able to fulfill my life's purpose, if that help is going to be instrumental to my realizing that, then I'm going to accept that help, and I'm going to accept it proudly. Because I'm certainly not going to let something like pride get in the way of realizing what I'm meant to achieve and meant to contribute in this world.
Gosh, that point about, first of all, dignity has come up so many times in other conversations that I've had with other change makers. And I think that there's so much power that you shared it from this perspective of what dignity, that dignity is something that everyone can have, and dignity is what everyone can experience and should experience. It is not reserved for a socioeconomic class or for your status or because you hold this title. It is your right as a human to have dignity. And it sounds like that's what really your parents really shared in you, showed you with the love and care. And, when you talk about that accepting of help and the dignity in being able to say, yes, like, I appreciate you helping me with this. And so much of that, it comes from this idea of there's a lot of broken trust when you look at these marginalized and communities that have been really, really oppressed. There's a lot of mistrust with the system. There's mistrust with leadership. There's mistrust with institutions. And so there's this idea that, I've got to have my own back. And when they come in and also you see families that are broken and you see families that also have that, then it gets into the cellular level. We talk about health, but like it gets into the cellular level of how we're then conditioned to showing up. And so, being able to say that, like, yes, I am going to accept help, and that doesn't make me smaller or doesn't make me pathetic, but it's what is going to get me to that purpose, something that you experienced is when you were, when you were going and studying and, just being a kid, you and your sister were then identified as two individuals that, this woman showed up in your life and said, I'm going to invest in you. And imagine if your family said, nope, we don't trust you. They're fine with where they're at and they're going to keep doing what they're doing, like how your life trajectory would have changed. I really would love for you to share the story about, your experience with this woman who came into your life and fundamentally changed everything about it.
There is no question about that. I think many times in life, we are in the presence of guardian angels, and we may not necessarily know it at the time, but eventually we get to know that. And Susan Luger was a guardian angel to both my sister and me.
We're gonna create a Find Susan Luger, social media attempt after this.
That would be awesome. My sister and I have tried unsuccessfully. So if through participation in this program, she and I are able to reconnect with Susan Luger, that would be a wonderful bonus to having participated here today. This woman didn't have to do what she was doing. She chose to live her life in that way, that she was going to commit her talents, her time, her resources to helping students like my sister and me, folks who showed promise, but didn't have the financial wherewithal that other students may have had. And she said, we're going to help these kids and we're going to prepare them to participate in schools, education that otherwise they wouldn't even know existed. And so she helped my sister and me and countless other promising minority students to prepare for the entrance exams for competitive schools. And this is something that my parents just didn't know anything about. And so the fact that she came into our lives and there we were Saturday after Saturday preparing for these exams. Now, remember, we're little kids. There are other things that we would have rather been doing on our Saturdays. But, my parents certainly saw the value, right? Because remember, my sister and I were too young to consent to this ourselves. So my parents had to be the first line to be able to say, hey, this is something really good, and please continue with what you're offering. And so for us to have that opportunity, and then, hey, we did the work, right? So we had to do our part and we had to do the work. And so, we took that entrance exam and we ended up gaining admission to the ethical culture schools. And so now we go from, in my case, attending a neighborhood school that I would get to with a 5-minute walk, the elementary school that I've been going to. Now I've got to take the subway from the Bronx into Manhattan to attend the Midtown School, it's called, on Central Park West. Can you imagine? Kid from Bronx public housing, and now all of a sudden I'm going to school on Central Park West? What? It's a whole new world.
Yeah.
But that's what, I was exposed to. And then, my sister went to Fieldston Lower. And then ultimately we both went to Fieldston, the school that we attended from 7th through 12th grade.
Yeah.
Just things that would not have even been on the radar screen.
Yeah.
And so, to think about what that position does to do afterwards. And then all of the people that my sister and I have been able to impact through our respective careers.
Yeah.
I mean, the impact is
It's in the thousands,
tremendous.
it's
Yeah.
tremendous. And I want to actually like talk about that moment because here you are, your parents see the value of this and you're receiving this incredible support. You're now being transported to a whole new world. And something that I remember as well, and people don't realize this, is that when I was doing clinical therapy and I was doing home-based counseling in New York, I would go out to the furthest areas of Brooklyn, East New York, and further out, like Coney Island is literally that's it, right? There's nothing more there. And these are kids who are born and raised in New York City, who are, live their entire lives out there. And in our sessions, they would ask me, like, so what does Central Park look like? What is it? What does Manhattan look like? Like, because when you're that far out, you actually can't even see the skyline. Like, it's not possible.
Right.
And so and for them, it's a decision of do I buy lunch or do I go on the subway? And so, making those decisions, like these are kids that are literally 45 minutes out and have never actually stepped into this whole world that the world glorifies.
Yeah.
And so be going from a space where, your whole world is in the Bronx, it's in the projects, and you're surrounded by people who have made amends with or justified, settled into that, well, this is my life and this is how I live and this is what my future is going to also look like. And you have now this opportunity of being transported into a whole other world. I can imagine that even as a kid, you are so well aware of how you are now just having this dance between two very, very different worlds and what that might have been like for you to walk down that hill, while everyone else is being bused in these private buses and you are taking the public bus back to the Bronx, yet you're in school with these kids, you're seeing how they live, you're experiencing what they're experiencing, you're getting that education as them, but then you're getting transported back to the world where they have justified that this is my future. How I've a few questions about this, but we'll start with, can you take us back to that moment of like what that felt like for you to have to kind of dance between these two worlds and have to navigate your own experience within your body?
Yeah. It's a great question. So you were describing the situation of my transporting to the Fieldston School. So I
Hmm.
was done with the Midtown School. That was the subway ride. And now the Fieldston School is also in the Bronx. And so the way I would get there is by public bus. And whenever I would arrive at the school in the morning, there would be all of these private buses, the Liberty Lines buses, all lined up, transporting the kids from the Upper West Side and the Upper East Side and wherever else they may have come from. And so, I was constantly having to manage that. It's like, why is it that these kids have this mode of transportation where they're basically picked up and taken to school, and then at the end of the day, they're picked up and taken home? And meanwhile, my sister and I have to walk down this very steep hill to get down to the public bus line to then take the bus home. And one of the things that I never did was I never begrudged other people's resources.
Mm,
I was like,
that's
God
huge.
bless,
I don't
right?
think
God
that
bless.
that's common.
Right. Right. So, God bless. But what I was left with was, why is it that the people that don't typically have those resources, that they far more often than not look like me? Why is that?
Yeah.
Right. And so it was very proactively wanting to address that observation that led to the career that I have, and one where I'm able to impact people's lives
Yeah.
in a positive way. So that's one of the things, right? You can't get caught up in what I don't have, because then you get mired in that rabbit hole, right? I think it's got to be more about an asset-based approach. It's like, hey, I have assets. They may not be material, but I have things that are of value. I am of value. And so what can I do to try to move forward? And that's where I mentioned before, accepting the help. I've accepted lots of help
Yep.
in my life, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm also now grateful for the fact that I'm able to help others, right? And
And
that's how we pay forward.
I think that like that part right there of, seeing yourself that I am of value. I don't need external materialistic things to see the value that I add, whether it's through the natural strengths and gifts that you have. Like if you are someone who was just brilliant when it comes to math, I can tell you I absolutely suck at math and you do not
Right.
want me doing your accounting. Like,
Right.
I should not be doing my own accounting. That's why I have an accountant.
Right.
But it's, everyone has a strength, everyone has a gift that they
Yeah.
come into this world with. And when you see that as value and asset that you're able to bring to the world, I'm curious that when you were a kid and you're going to Fieldston and you're seeing this and you're getting the exposure and you're seeing and you're it sounds like you're having a lot of gratitude for this opportunity. Were you able to then, as you come back into home and now you've got your friends that you've growing up with and they're seeing you go to Fieldston, did you notice you being able to influence them or inspire them as well to being like, hey, yes, you're not at Fieldston with me, but this is what you can be doing too.
Yeah.
Did you see
Yeah.
those changes even then?
Yeah, it was about trying to do the best I could with what I had. And I had been blessed, right, with certain opportunities that otherwise would not have come my way, thanks to Susan Luger and others. And so I was very conscious about making sure that others had that proper mindset, or what I viewed as the proper mindset of, hey, we may also not have had everything that we would have wanted to have growing up. But it's about how do we make the most of what we have and wanting to make a difference in the world, right? We're not going to
Yeah.
be here forever. So what's going to outlive us, right? What's our legacy going to be
Yeah.
for having been on this earth?
And how can you
Oh,
build your legacy while you're still living, right? Like not wait for it to be until you're
yeah.
gone, but it's like your living legacy. And for you, Miguel, your living legacy is the impact you're able to make through, you know, doing social impact work, by being part of Healthfirst and making sure that communities have the right healthcare and have access to things that, otherwise those resources seem very, far and few between. What I'm curious about though is that so you see your value, you see your assets, you see all this. You're given this opportunity at Fieldston. You're inspiring people around you, even at that age, to look at like, what do you have and what can you work with? And yet, when you are getting ready to go to college, you then get your student counselor who is trying to prevent you from applying to Columbia and saying that, you may not want to apply there and maybe you want to apply to somewhere that's more affordable or that's a little bit
Or
more,
realistic.
more realistic for you. I say this also with having my own experience with the dean of my college telling me that I shouldn't bother finishing because I'm not going to amount to anything. And I think about,
Yeah.
my friend Jasmine, who also grew up in Sunset Park and went to, she was the first generation coming out of the projects, got her PhD at Yale, but like her experience of having to get there, prove herself, it stays with you in your body. Think even about Michelle Obama, right? Michelle Obama was told that like, nah, you're not going to get into
Mhm.
Princeton. Like,
But
you need to, think a little bit more smaller than where you're thinking. Like your head's getting too big. But for you, when that voice arrived and when you have this person who's supposed to be your high school guidance counselor, who is supposed to be on your side, telling you not to apply to Columbia, and you did it anyways, and you got in, and in there was this internal battle then of like, can I make it there? Is it too much for me? Like, I want to know what that experience was like for you to believe in yourself, but get accepted somewhere that you wanted to go. But then that internal battle of what happens to the kid from the Bronx who cares so deeply, who is supposed to, make and is doing incredible work, but that voice? How do you battle with that voice that gets like incepted into your mind?
Yeah, it's really hard. And, again, that's where accepting help pulled me through. The first source of help was from my parents and my family. And I remember getting this consistent message: hey, if they accepted you, it's because they believe you can do the work.
You belong there.
Right. They wouldn't have accepted you otherwise. So it's like, okay, that has merit. But I had to come to believe that myself. Right. So it's one thing for people to tell you, but then when you've had a life of wondering, why is the system not necessarily working for people who look like me? Right. Then you start to wonder, wow, maybe there's a reason why the guidance counselor was trying to give me this advice. And so having to push through that was very difficult. And I will say that what was a great help was the Higher Education Opportunity Program. I was accepted into the Higher Education Opportunity Program, which provides extra financial support. There's a pre-freshman orientation to help acclimate, kids to the college life, right? Particularly those who, like me, didn't have parents who had gone to college, who could sit down with me and tell me, son, this is great. You're in Columbia now. Let me tell you what you're in for now.
Yep.
I didn't have anybody to tell me.
Yeah. They don't have
So,
names on buildings. They don't have,
right,
you know,
right,
that alum
right.
access.
That's right. So, without having had the financial wherewithal or anyone in my immediate circle that had gone through college, right? I was the first one to go. Thank goodness for this program. To also similarly to Susan Luger, the program communicates that we believe in you. We believe you have enormous potential, but we need to level the playing field. And this is equity in action, right? Leveling the playing field. So others who have this benefit of their parents having gone to college, you don't have that. So what do you need in order to level the playing field with someone who has that kind of experience? Again, not begrudging that individual who has that experience, but hey, how about me?
How do I get a little bit of that action? Yeah.
Right, right. And so, this program instilled that confidence. That was sort of the final push to say, hey, Miguel, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And how often in life is it so important for us to truly understand that we are not alone?
That is that part where, even if you think about it, what you're just saying right there is that students who have parents that have generational support of going to college, they have help because their parents know what it's like and they can help them with that. Students or just individuals who have parents that own businesses, they're able to say, all right, yeah, sure, go out there, get an internship, whatever, but ultimately you can come work into my business. You have something here to work through. I'm going to teach you how to think about business. You hear this all the time with kids who grow up in wealthy homes. The way that those parents set their kids up to already receiving financial benefits from a very young age, and the way that they even teach them about money, like money is a tool, money is energy, money is something that you flow, versus when you're someone who's growing up in the projects or you're growing up middle class, like your relationship to money is so different. And so in the same manner, that relationship to help, and it's like circling back to that, is so different. The one who is, we look at kind of like Amazon, or you look at these large organizations, they have no problems getting a corporate handout, and asking for support from the government when things are not doing what, like we had, during
Yeah.
COVID and the pandemic with the big bailout with like airlines and industries. And, we had all of those things, and they're asking for it because they make it into and justify it as business sense. It makes business sense for us in order for our business to not collapse, which employs thousands of people. And so that it doesn't collapse the economics of our society, it makes sense for you, the government, to help support us. But yet, if we take that same conversation and move it down to individuals where it's saying, hey, you know what? You don't have the same resources available to you that this wealthy person can or this organization can, but I want to make sure that you still get access to education. I want to make sure that you still get access to, you know, being able to change the trajectory of your life. And those same individuals are looking at help as if because we've been trained in society to say that, oh, it's a handout. And so what I'm hearing with you is like you really flip that. It's like this isn't a handout. You are still having to do the work. You may have that opportunity. It's no different than like, a LeBron James' son can come into the basketball, but if he doesn't perform, he's out. So you're getting access, but you
Right.
still have to do the work to actually, continue to reap the benefits of it. And so
Yeah.
that
Oh, absolutely.
relationship to help is how you're reframing the way and because your family accepted help from Susan Luger, because you went to that class, and you understood, okay, like what is it going to take for me to be successful here at Columbia? It continued to change the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely. I mean, no question about it. It's, Susan Luger presented the platform of the classes, but I still had to do the work on the Saturdays in order to be able to do well enough on the exam to be able to gain admission to the ethical culture schools. And then at the college level, wonderful, greatly appreciative of the support that the Higher Education Opportunity Program provided. But then I've got to go to the classes and I've got to do the work. And, I'm proud to share that, I was on Dean's List for 5 semesters of my
Yeah.
time at Columbia. That didn't just happen. I had to put in the work.
Yep.
And then subsequent to that at NYU. And, to the point where I was, the student speaker at graduation. Again, I had to do all of that work in order to
Yeah.
get there. And
Yeah.
so, society unfortunately sometimes stigmatizes the fact that
Yeah.
people need help. The same society that will withhold resources from these folks
Right.
will also then stigmatize the same folks who are trying to gain resources that have been withheld from them from so long. I was
Right.
like, wow, that's patently unfair.
Yeah.
And so I want to flip that script and
Yeah.
say, hey, you know, let's work where we can to break down those societal barriers. And one of those barriers is to normalize help, giving it, receiving it as a way for everyone to be able to move forward. Because again, at the end of the day, everyone has to do the work. Once they get
Yeah.
the assistance, they've got to do the work.
Yeah. And you started to see, you went from receiving that help, obviously as a kid and growing into that person to now you're out in the world, you're an adult, you have you're in your job, one of your first jobs working at the
Mhm.
family shelter.
Mhm.
And a family shelter, 80 families in one building, all waiting for the call that, you found a home for them. But you did this differently. You showed them again dignity, that they're not just a family who happens to live here and that they should be so grateful to be able to get an apartment, or they should be so grateful for whatever you just like give to them, as if like, here's a leftovers, here it is. You should be grateful that you're even getting my leftovers. And that is how, sadly, a lot of ways people tend to move who are not in those worlds. And so they don't understand it. They don't necessarily always understand that, like, again, these are people who are in these shelters because of challenging situations that happened. Again, to debunk the myth, it's not necessarily because of mental health or because of drug abuse or any of those things. It's actually because they lost a job. They, had medical bills that were just too much for them, and they, weren't able to make rent. They weren't able to pay they had to make a choice. Do I eat today or do I pay for this? And you have these families, kids living in this shelter. And I want you to walk us through how you showed them dignity, how you showed them that I don't care what your situation was that led you to this moment, but you absolutely deserve dignity in placement.
Yeah, yeah. I remember it as if it were yesterday. So the family homeless shelter was in the Bronx. Families, however, were placed there from all over New York City. So they weren't just Bronx families who needed the support. There were people who came from all over. And I remember an exchange that I had with a family that had been relocated from Brooklyn. Brooklyn to the Bronx is not a short trip. And yet they were displaced. In this instance, it was due to a fire.
Mm.
And so their networks were in Brooklyn. And to them, the Bronx might as well have been another state, another country.
Right.
And so I remember the first time, I'm in my office, the mother comes in with her 4 kids. And one of the first questions that I asked was, where would you prefer to have permanent housing once you leave here? And she said, excuse me? So I had to repeat it. And then I wanted to share a little of the why behind the question. And it was because, hey, I know that the kids had friends and there may even have been family members who helped take care of the kids.
And those are resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Resources that need to be acknowledged and valued. And so, I shared this rationale with her and, she started to cry because she had not been asked these kinds of questions when she entered the homeless system. It was basically just being processed. And here's where you show up.
Right.
There
You're a
wasn't any
number.
concern, right? There wasn't any concern about networks that may have been left behind. And so for her to have heard someone who was in a position to help actually ask what was important to her, and not, as you mentioned before, how sometimes it's characterized, hey, you're happy for whatever you get. No. What would you prefer? Right in that moment, I could see the heaviness lift from her shoulders because now she had confidence that when her family got back on their feet, they would be able to do so in a place where the networks could be reactivated.
Yeah.
And all of the support that comes with that. And so, I did that work for a couple of years. And so that same kind of experience played out over and over. And and remember, I'm asking the question as the individual who lived in public housing and often had the heat and hot water shut off.
Right.
So I'm asking from that place of empathy.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful to have had that opportunity because, some of the families, not all of them, but some of them, after they were placed, would actually reach out and share, how well things had been going for the family. And just, a word of thanks for caring enough to ask the question about what was important to me, right?
Dignity. Sharing
Absolutely.
dignity. It's this person just
Absolutely.
happened to be going through a season of a rough time. I mean, we have a family friend, one of my father's old college buddies, who actually grew up in extreme wealth in India and moved here and, got into real estate, got married, had kids, the whole thing. And in the early 90s, when there was that big collapse, ended up losing everything and went from a lot of wealth and having all these real estate properties and everything and going into him, his wife, and his 3 kids living in their car. And so, to go from that moment and then from there was able to, because of the support and because of being able to one, know what it's like to be at the top and know what access and resources and things are available. And then being able to get to this point and then tap into that again and being able to say all right, I know what it takes to get up here again, but right now, this is the support that I need and getting that and was able to rebuild all the way to the same moment again. But I take that story because similar to what you're talking about is that no one would have thought that someone who comes from extreme wealth can actually drop to that moment and have to deal with the same challenges where I think people expect it to be that, oh, well, these are individuals that have always been in these positions. These are individuals that have always struggled or they don't know how to manage their money. They don't know how to manage this or whatever. And now they're just being a burden on us, not having taken the moment like you have to have that empathy and compassion and to provide context to what matters. And I think that, what you're talking about is the fact that you asked the question of, hey, where would you prefer to live? Where is your community? Where are your kids' friends? What school does your kid go to? What you're actually then doing is you're utilizing the resources that the system has in a way that won't have these individuals collapse again onto the system. So when we talk about that cycle, how much of the system is actually doing it to itself by not having compassion and empathy and dignity for these people? Because if you're just saying like, all right, we'll just place you here, we'll just place you there, we'll just place you there. And now they're having to start all over again without resources, without the support system, without their community around them, they're going to collapse back and be like, oh, here they come again.
Yeah.
And it's like, but your due diligence of you showing that dignity and you asking those questions actually prevented the system from being collapsing over and over again.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And those are the kinds of things that don't show up necessarily in a report, right?
Right.
There are things that might show up in a report. Oh, this person was placed in this housing facility. Wonderful, right? But what's not necessarily captured is what kind of quality of life do they have after being placed somewhere that is far from their networks, far from what they have known, and to what degree were those factors even considered, right?
Yeah.
You know,
And you've taken that and now, you're at Health First. And again, another organization that cares deeply about creating accessibility with healthcare so that individuals who are living in these areas have resources to support. And you shared a beautiful story with me about a woman who truly became a champion, you could call her the PR without, the unofficial PR for what
yeah,
Health First did. I'd love for you to share that story and just about, again, this 25, 30-year career you've had now of just continued validation about when you show up with dignity and with support and help these individuals and these society and communities see how their life just becomes so much more elevated and beneficial by receiving help from a place of dignity, how that can just completely transform everything. I'd love for you to share that story and just also just how her experience shifted the way then the community and neighborhood started trusting Health First.
yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just say, for those who may not know, right, Health First is the largest not-for-profit health insurer here in downstate New York. Health First is privileged to serve over 2 million New Yorkers. These are individuals who have access now to high quality, low cost healthcare who otherwise would very likely not have it. And so, we in community engagement spend quite a bit of time educating the community on health and wellness, on other things, again, to empower people to have the tools that they need in order to live their happiest, most productive life. And so, in the course of doing this work, we met this wonderful ambassador, as it turned out, for Health First. She was always so proud to share her Health First story. And she would tell anyone who was within earshot that when I got cancer, Health First was there for me every step of the way. And I am a Health First member for life. She was a woman of wonderful spirit, incredibly community minded, incredibly community minded. She unfortunately ended up losing her battle with cancer. But, we continue to work with that community. We continue to work with her children who are advancing her vision for community empowerment through her foundation that she created. And so, that is one example of doing well by doing good, right? We do well by doing right by people. It's not trying to get by. It's not trying to get around or get over. It's doing what's in that individual's best interests. We do well by doing good. And so I think it's the approach that we take at Health First, I think is one that hopefully more and more companies can emulate. Is
And I think,
there's incredible loyalty that is then built in once you have treated someone with respect and dignity, right?
yeah. And I think that's something we're probably going to see more and more with organizations that as AI technology really takes over, we are going to see, I think, an evolution of people who now the value of human and being human is going to become even more elevated. People are going to crave it. So organizations who actually lean in to making a difference in that touch point where you're not just another call on customer service, you're not just another patient, but you are someone that is seen as an important figure in someone's life. Like your health matters. And so I think more and more organizations that actually take that purpose and embed those values are actually going to see an uptick in customers being satisfied, being happy, and also just functioning better.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, AI should support human interaction, not replace it.
Correct. Yeah. And so, Miguel, I feel like your life, like you were born for this. Susan Luger didn't just see a kid who was in the Bronx that was like, oh, you're smart. All right, she saw you. She saw the compassion. She saw the empathy. She saw what gift you had specifically and knew that you were the one to nurture to get to the place where you are because of that, because Susan and because of countless others who took a chance on you and said, I want to help you. And you were like, bring it, let's do it. And your parents role modeled that by accepting Susan's help and role model to you that you are worth being at Columbia. They chose you, they said yes to you. So you need to now say yes to yourself. And I think that what you are really emulating and what you have is showing whether you're a change maker or you are someone who works in the social impact space, but you didn't necessarily come from that world. It can be very easy to look at those individuals as like, these are my clients and these are my patients and these are my that, but then I return to my world, right? And what you're really showing, Miguel, through your entire storyline and everything that you've done, every story that you've shared is that every moment of this is that we're all humans just trying to like exist in this world and show
Yeah.
up and do the best we can for ourselves, for our neighbors and everything. And if we can just make it a little easier for each one, I personally believe that the more that we lean in, the more everybody benefits. Because if everyone's asking each other, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Then you're also being asked, what do you need? And you're also being received that help. And so the way that you share that with such, again, the theme of the conversation, dignity, the way that you really share that, I mean, I think it's really special. And I think it's something that people who get immune to the work that they do and stop treating people with that conscious compassion, need to kind of keep that at top of mind for them. Like, I mean, this happens to like crisis doctors, this happens to social
Yeah.
workers. When you're working in those spaces, it becomes very easy to be like, yeah, okay, it's another day, another client, another situation.
Mhm.
So, how do you, who has spent your entire life committed to giving people better opportunities of living their life with dignity, how do you help, other change makers that are coming into the world, into this world work, who are emerged and in the thick of it, who are getting exhausted, who are tired? How do
Right.
you help them hold that dignity at the top so that it doesn't actually then, lose trust with the people that they are here to work and support?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very important never to commoditize the work that you do. And like you were saying, it's sometimes very easy to do that. Oh, how many new members have we gotten this month? Oh, right, fill in the blank, depending on the type of work that you do. And you always have to remember the human stories behind those things, right? So yes, how many for how many families have we now provided incredible peace of mind because now they know that they have access to this low cost, high quality health insurance that they otherwise might not have had. And so I think you always have to keep that humanity at the center. One of the things that I share with my employees, the folks on my team all the time, if any of them was here right now, they would all say, yes, Miguel does tell us this. I always remind them, you are not just an employee to me. You're a human being. And so I want you to bring all of yourself to work. And so our conversations will extend beyond the project or projects at hand and extend to how's your family doing? How are you doing? Right? How
Mm.
can I help? And these are the kinds of things that create very strong bonds because everyone wants an opportunity to work for someone who cares about them as people.
Right.
And that they're not just an employee, they're not just a number. And so, as we extend that mentality into everything that we do and treat people as human beings, seems like a very simple notion. But unfortunately, as you well know, not as
Often.
common
Yeah.
these days as one would hope.
Right.
And so, we can never lose hope so long as we keep humanity at the center of what we do.
My gosh, Miguel, I feel like you're healing parts of me that were wounded. Generally, like just by saying that, I can tell you that my last corporate job was incredibly toxic. And my manager was the one who was made like till by the end of my time working corporate, it was very much I was having nausea. I was like my stomach was, I was having
Sunday nights,
anxiety.
you were
Sunday
like, oh my
nights,
God,
right? I mean,
Monday.
forget
Yeah,
Sunday nights, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, like every night, right? Like it was just, and then that, of course, inflicts the quality of work that I'm able to do, and it
absolutely.
becomes a self-inflicted prophecy of whatever that person is putting on you. You ultimately end up showing poor work, and then you're not performing well, and then you're going to ultimately end up leaving the job, regardless of being either leaving on your own terms or leaving because they push you out. And I genuinely wish that every company and every place had a Miguel, because the way that you share that, I think every person, whether you're a leader, whether you're a manager, whether you're an individual contributor, whatever work you're doing, yes, you've got wounds, you've got things that you've got to work through. But the
Yeah.
minute you start projecting that onto somebody else because you haven't worked through your own stuff, you're then also impacting that person's trajectory, their confidence, their future, all of those things. That individual, the guidance counselor who told you that, I don't think you should apply to Columbia, the dean who told me that I shouldn't even bother graduating from college, all of those play just as much of an impact in our minds and the way then that we operate,
Mhm.
as does the way that society has conditioned certain people in different neighborhoods to see themselves. And Miguel, what you just again show with so much compassion is that we don't have to choose to be that way. And we have a
Right.
choice to have humanity, have compassion, and again, treat people with dignity. And when you treat people with dignity, you receive that respect back. And that can
Absolutely.
change all of our communities in the way that we
Absolutely.
operate.
You receive it tenfold.
Yeah. Miguel, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, for the warmth that you bring, for the experiences that you've shared, the stories that you've shared. And I really hope that everyone who's listening here, I know right now a lot of change makers are just really exhausted with what's going on in our world and what we have to carry. And I just know that what you have just provided is a sense for these change makers and a sense of community, that there are change makers like you, Miguel, who help us see that the work is worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. And Dr. Barry, for the work that you do, right? The work that you do is so critically important. And I know that there are frustrating days, but never forget, right? The impact that you're having by telling these stories. How many people hopefully will be inspired by the conversation that we had today. And then multiply that by all of the conversations that you facilitate. And so
Yeah.
thank you for the work that you do to uplift communities and to share these stories. It's very, very important that
Thank you.
they're communicated.
I receive that. I appreciate that. And hopefully we'll have you back soon too.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Awesome. If you're enjoying these episodes, I'd really love it if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. Your words help others discover that the stories and these episodes exist in the perspectives that we're exploring over here. And the more feedback we get from you through those reviews, the more we can make sure that we're creating meaningful episodes that you want to listen to. Thank you so much.